With the release of Warzone Season 4, it's time to once again dive into the game settings to maximize your performance. In today's video, we're going to be dialing in the best settings for improved FPS and visibility whilst lowering input lag to make your game feel as smooth as possible. So if you do enjoy this video, then please do leave a like down below. It helps me out a ton, shows me that you're appreciating the content here, and also subscribe for more videos coming very soon. Leave a comment as well if you have any questions about these settings. So we're in game now, jumping into the options. Now, this video is going to focus mainly on graphics. We are going to go into other areas after we've dialed in the graphics, because obviously graphics is where we're going to gain the actual performance benefits, but there are some interesting ways you can improve your overall settings by diving into some of these other areas as well. So starting off in the display area of graphics, display mode. I would recommend that most people starting off put this to full screen. I'm not running it at full screen at the moment. I'll explain why, but full screen in most circumstances is going to give you the lowest input latency. That's really the most important thing here. When you're running the game in full screen, it's basically an exclusive full screen, so it's not rendering anything else on your PC in the background. It's just giving as much resource as possible to the game while it's running. Now, the reason I'm running full screen borderless is a couple of reasons. First of all, I do content creation, so I'm alt-tabbing a lot, and if you're someone who does alt-tab a lot, then full screen borderless really helps out. This game has a few bugs when you're alt-tabbing in and out. If you try it on full screen, it's a bit laggy. And also, some people, including myself, actually get similar, if not better, performance running with full screen borderless. So really, I would just try both of these out. Try a game on full screen, try a game on borderless, see which one feels better to you. In practice, full screen should give you the best performance. That's what I would generally stick to. But try out full screen borderless when you can. See which one works better for you. Display monitor, this is just going to be whichever monitor you want to actually output your game to. So for me, it's to my Elgato, which then goes to my main monitor rather than my second monitor. You'll know it's on the correct monitor because your game will be up on the monitor. Nothing to change here. Display adapter, there should only be one option here, assuming you've got one GPU, which will be, for me, is my 3070. If you have multiple GPUs, make sure you're not trying to render out of some internal GPU or something like that. You want to make sure you're using your external, your dedicated GPU for actually rendering the game. Most people aren't going to have a problem with this. Screen refresh rate, because I'm at borderless, I can't change this. It's set to 240 because this is what my game is. Sorry, my monitor is. I've got a 240 Hz 1080p monitor. But if you have it set to full screen, you'll be able to actually change this. All I'll say is do not have this at any lower than your refresh rate of your monitor. Just match it up 1-to-1. It's not a case of, oh, I've got a 140 Hz monitor, but I'm only hitting 100 FPS. I'll drop the refresh rate. That's not what we're going to do. We just need to set the refresh rate to match the monitor. Simple. Render resolution. Just set this to 100. No real reason to up or down this. It basically just will make your game either look a bit more blurry if you drop it down and give you a bit of FPS, and if you turn it up, it will give you kind of a sharper image overall, but at the cost of pretty crucial FPS. For most people, just leave it at 100%. That way you're just rendering at your native resolution, and then coming down to advanced, make sure display resolution is set at your native resolution. If you've got full screen borderless on, you won't be able to change this, similar to the refresh rate. If you're playing at full screen, you might be able to change this here. There is some other settings that I'll be talking about a little later on that will be talking about how we can actually manipulate resolutions in some ways to improve performance if you really need it, but don't touch it here. Leave it as is. Dynamic resolution, leave this off, and then dynamic resolution frame rate target, not something we need to play around with. There's better options other than using dynamic resolution at the moment in Warzone, things like DLSS, and just generally, if you need to, changing resolution, but don't touch dynamic resolution. Aspect ratio, automatic, sync every frame. You want to put this to disabled. This is VSync. It's nice. If you have it on, it will reduce your screen tearing overall, especially if you're on a lower hertz monitor, but it adds pretty incredible amounts of input lag. If you're going to run the game with G-Sync, this is not going to be a video covering that if you've got a G-Sync monitor. Go watch another video on that, then it might involve you setting it to enabled in here. But for most normal people just looking for maximum performance, not considering G-Sync, you want to keep this off. Custom frame rate limit, I had this set to unlimited, but I would recommend you set it to custom, then come down into the advanced area, gameplay custom frame rate limit, just set this to all the way to the right, it will say 300. You're not going to be hitting 300 FPS in Warzone, so essentially this is unlimited. You'll just be hitting whatever the max you can hit with your setup, hopefully getting some good FPS from this video. Menu custom frame rate limit, I would recommend you just put this to something that feels nice and smooth in the menus, but isn't maxed out. You know, if we're just sitting in the menus or playing around in the menus, we don't need it to be using up loads and loads of system resource. You know, especially the menu will actually run at a much higher FPS than the game. This can cause your GPU to coil whine. You can get like a kind of annoying whining noise if you have, you know, a little bit of a bad GPU. You can resolve that just by running it. Like 100 FPS feels smooth. I don't like running at 60 because that doesn't feel that nice in the menu, but 100 feels okay. I'm actually just going to apply this now because, as you can see, my FPS was going off. I usually have this set to custom. Don't know why it was changed. But out of focus frame rate limit, we're then going to set this to something like 30. You could even drop this lower. Basically, this is just going to make it so that if we alt-tab out the game, it's not using any resource really. If we're alt-tabbing to go do something on a second monitor, going on the internet or something, we don't need this to, you know, max. There's no point. It's just going to lag the whole PC out. So just set this lower and bada bing, bada boom, you're sorted. Next up, brightness. Turn this up to 55. I would recommend this for everyone. Obviously, it's going to depend a little bit based on your monitor. You might actually need to turn it higher. But I think that the default 50, you know, bang in the middle, is quite dark. And you can get some improved just general visibility, especially in dark areas of the map, just by bumping this brightness up to 55. Display gamma, pretty simple. Just set it to 2.2 for most people. That's going to mean that you're outputting to a monitor. If you're outputting to a TV, you know, you've got your PC linked up to a TV for some reason, you're not running through a monitor. Don't know why you'd be doing that, but for that, you'd want to run 2.4. But yeah, for most people, 2.2. Nvidia highlights, disable those. It shouldn't really have any effect on your FPS, but in general, if it's something you're not using, then there's just no point running it. It could, you know, affect performance if it's trying to record highlights while you're playing. So keep it off. And then NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency. You're going to want to set this to either enabled or enabled plus boost. The difference in which you actually want to set is described over on the right here. So enabled says a low latency mode is enabled, optimizing system latency. Doesn't really explain much. The next one says low latency mode is now enabled and optimizing system latency. Additional GPU clock frequencies are kept high in CPU bound cases. This can reduce latency but will increase the GPU draw. Essentially, what this is saying is if you are in a CPU bound case, i.e. you have a mid-tier CPU and a really good GPU, which is essentially what I've got, then I would want to set this to enabled plus boost. Once again, not sure why it was set to enabled. Maybe after the update, some things changed, but for me, I would want this at enabled plus boost. However, if you're in a situation where you've got a really strong CPU that can potentially match up to your GPU in terms of just raw power, like you're running a newer, really up-to-date Ryzen or an up-to-date i7, then you might get better performance out of enabled. My recommendation is just to try both out in different games and see if you get improved performance either way around. That way, you know for sure, you're not just, basing it off of, I think one thing's more strong than the other. Nah, just test it out. Simplest way. Okay, let's dive into quality and see if we can bash through this pretty quick. Okay, field of view. I would recommend that most people just max this out. It will affect FPS a little bit. So if you want to get some FPS gains minorly, especially when we've gone through all the settings here, you can try maybe lowering this to 110. I wouldn't go below there though. You're just losing out on such important amounts of information that you get from having 120 FOV. This is also about trying to maintain sort of visibility in the game, and you lose visibility, literally finite visibility, by just limiting your field of view. Then in advanced, make sure ADS field of view is set to affected. What this is going to do, and this is more of a gameplay tweak than a kind of graphics tweak, it's going to make it so that when you ADS with sites that are lower than a 3.25, so basically this is going to be mainly for like your SMGs, it's not going to affect your assault rifles that much in it, using the 2.5s, I guess, on the Vanguard guns. It's going to make it so that you don't actually zoom in as much. It does make it technically a little bit harder to see enemies, but when you're using these low magnification scopes, or things like SMGs, or just iron sights, in general, it's for those close range fights. And having affected ADS field of view means that you keep a wide field of view when you ADS. Really, really important, because otherwise you zoom in, you lose a lot of information, and by having that added zoom, you increase the visual recoil. I talked about this in a previous video that I did, but visual recoil is a killer. So All of those things added together mean you should leave this affected. Camera movement, leave this at least 50%. I don't think this actually makes that much difference, but in general, you don't want your camera moving too much from things happening in the game, because once again, that can ruin visibility. If you spot someone and then the camera shakes for whatever reason it might be, an explosion. I don't actually know exactly what affects this, but just leave it at least. Streaming quality, put this on low. It favors the texture's performance over quality. Pretty simple, no real reason to have this on high. Texture resolution, a bit of a personal preference here. I like to run at normal. This is going to be really down to how much VRAM you have. As you can see down here, I've got 8 gig VRAM and I'm not even near the max. Really, this doesn't affect FPS much at all, and in my opinion, it makes the game look way better, and I can actually see far easier when I've got those sharper textures in the game. Some people swear by running very low and they prefer it, so it's a bit of a personal preference option unless you're running a really, really weak GPU. If you're running a weak GPU with not much VRAM, then you're just going to need to run this at very low, because this is one of the biggest causes of high VRAM usage. So for me, I like running it at normal. I would never run it at high. There's no need to. It doesn't look any different from normal. If not, you can turn it down if you've got low VRAM. Texture filter anisotropic. Shove that all the way to the high. It doesn't matter what you're running. This makes the game look way better, improves the sharpness in general of a lot of like the little things that you see from a non kind of direct angle. So you can see in the picture here, the floor I'm looking at from an angle. I'm not looking at it directly down on it. I'm looking at the texture from an angle. It makes it look way, way better, and it has no effect on FPS, really. Anisotropic filtering never does. So yeah, shove this on high. Particle quality. This has always been a weird one, but for some reason running this on high has been known to improve FPS, and this has been the case in Warzone for quite some time. A lot of people will just shove this on low because they'll think, ooh, particles, don't really care how they look, just want FPS. And they'll go low. Nah, high gives better FPS. We don't know why, just do it. Bullet impacts and sprays is personal preference. I've got them disabled at the moment. I've enabled them in the past. It doesn't matter. Just set them what you want. It has no effect on performance. Do what you want. Tessellation disabled. We do not want to be using kind of one of these, I guess, post-processing techniques. It's just going to eat up resource when we don't really need it. It's, it adds some geometry and 3D to some textures and stuff. It's just unnecessary. It's unnecessary performance usage. Dismemberment and gore effects. I've turned these off because in my head, it's basically, gore effects could cover up certain areas of visibility. So I just turn them off. Once again, it's probably more of a personal preference thing, though, if you really like seeing blood and stuff when they get shot by heavy rounds. I don't know how much this happens in Warzone anyway, so I would just recommend you disable it. On-demand texture streaming, keep this to disabled. It will then lock all the things in here. It's just not something we want to be doing. We don't want to be downloading textures while we're playing the game. That just is a no-no in general, so just keep this disabled. And then restart shader installation. This is a really, really useful point here. If you have a problem with your game, it starts lagging, you start having kind of stutters, and you just think, I can't figure out what's wrong with my game. First thing to do, come in here and just restart your shaders installation. Run the shader installation again and see if it fixes the problem. A lot of the time, it will. I haven't had a problem with shaders in quite some time, but I used to get a couple of problems, and this was the thing which sorted it for me. So little tip there. Next, we get into the post-processing effects section, which is a very important section in general for visibility. Filmic strength. This is going to be dependent on what we set for anti-aliasing, so we'll come back to that in a second. Film grain is just 100%. Just shove that on 0. Horrible. Why would you want this on? Affects your visibility just dreadfully. I don't know why this is still a thing in games, why anyone would ever want this on. No, turn it off. Nvidia DLSS. Now, you will need a RTX graphics card to get access to this option, and I've got probably a couple of recommendations for how you can use this. In a standard setup, kind of going through this video, I would recommend if you are on a 1080p monitor, keep this disabled. It doesn't really do anything if you're just running at 1080p. It actually makes the game look a bit worse and doesn't really give you much gains in terms of FPS. If you're running on a 1440p monitor, I'd recommend you put this on quality and try it out. It might make the game look a bit too fuzzy for you in certain areas and certain items when you're picking them up off the floor, but it does give nice improvements. It even says over here it's recommended for 2K gameplay, which is 1440p. So on my second monitor, if I was playing on that, then DLSS would be pretty useful. But for me, disabled is the better option. Now, there is a way you can combine DLSS with some other RTX graphics card specific options in the Nvidia control panel. I'm going to be making a video on that soon, and it can give you pretty incredible visibility gains, but I'm not going to be covering it in this video because it is a bit more advanced. We're focusing on game settings at the moment. So for most people playing on their 1080p monitors, keep it to disabled, put it to quality if you want, if you're playing on 1440p. Okay, anti-aliasing. This is another one, which is pretty hefty in terms of visibility, but also FPS. So anti-aliasing I would recommend for most people, especially if you're limited in terms of your system and you want to just push the FPS, put this to off or SMAA 1X. The FPS is pretty similar between the two. You lose a little bit of FPS from running 1X, but some people just can't stand the jagged edges that you get from having it off. So bit of a personal preference thing here. Either way, if you're running off or SMAA 1X, you need filmic strength set to 1. It says that here. If the anti-aliasing option is not set to T2X or filmic T2X, set filmic strength to 1. So we're making sure that we're setting this to 1 here. Now, another visibility tip. If you are using a sharpening filter, which you can do with Nvidia, that's going to be included in the same video as I talk about when I was mentioning about the DLSS video that's coming very, very soon, then you can turn up to filmic SMAA T2X and then turn your filmic strength down to 0. This, in general, makes the game look blurry, but it really covers up a lot of the jaggies that you get, especially on Caldera, with a lot of the bushes in the background that shimmer and look kind of horrible. You can set it up like this, and then you can run a sharpen filter to bring the sharpness back that the filmic SMAA takes away. But this does also drop your FPS a bit more. So for most people, let's go back to this option for this video specifically, off or SMAA 1X with 1.0. And if you want to learn about those other visibility stuff, I'll talk about it in my next video. Okay, let's very quickly get through these. Depth of field, world motion blur, and weapon motion blur, we want them all disabled. Not helpful, not nice. Shadow map resolution, low, definitely. The reason we want this low is because it just gives you nice gains in FPS, and honestly, I don't know what they've done with the shadows recently, but they don't look that bad on low. They used to look terrible, now they look like okay. So yeah, just shove these on low to gain the maximum performance you can get. Cache spot shadows and cache sun shadows, enable both of these. It means that you actually store certain shadows in your cache, in your RAM basically, and it means that when you need to load in those certain shadows kind of in future, it can pull from there very, very quickly. Less stutters, less FPS drops, and just overall better performance. Particle lighting, put this to low. DirectX ray tracing, definitely off. A lot of you guys won't even have access to this because you do need an RTX card, but not something we want to use in Warzone. And then ambient occlusion and screen space reflection, both, once again, extra kind of effect and extra glitz and glam, not stuff that we want to be using. Okay, couple of extra options I want to cover. That's basically everything in terms of visibility. The only other thing which I would say in terms of graphics is if you come into interface, make sure your colorblind type is on Deuteranopia and your colorblind target is both, which is the world and the interface. It just makes the whole game pop a little bit more, adds a little bit more color to the game. A lot of people have recommended doing this, and I quite like it too. Horizontal and vertical heads-up display bounds, I'd actually recommend that you try bringing these up a little bit. If you've got these set at 0, it just brings in the heads-up display, so you're not having to have your eyes kind of dart around the screen as much. I quite like it as a little added option. And then minimap shape, make sure this is set to square because you gain way more visibility on your minimap. You can see on this left example here, you can't actually see the bottom right bit of the map, whereas when you've got it set to a square, you can. So imagine you've popped a UAV, you're running around in Warzone. If someone was in this corner on this left one, you wouldn't actually know exactly where he was. You'd just see the circle here, which wouldn't be that useful. Whereas here, you'd be able to see him. So really, really important in terms of just bumping that kind of information gathering aspect of the game. Audio. Make sure you've got this set to midnight mode. I did an explanation of 5 incredible settings that you need to be set up in Warzone. I did a bit more explanation on midnight mode in there, as well as a video I covered on audio settings. So I've touched on this a lot. I still believe midnight mode is the best audio option because what it does is it lowers the volume of the really loud sounds that you don't actually need to hear because they're already so loud, and it really raises up those quiet sounds of footsteps and people plating and stuff like that. And it's a game changer. I can just get so much more info, especially when we're playing some of those smaller maps and there's a lot of stuff going on. I can hear everything I need to hear. All you need to do is set it to midnight mode, turn your master volume up a little bit because it will overall sound quieter, the game as a whole, so turn it up. And then I would recommend music volume, keep that off because it just gets in the way. Dialogue volume as well kind of gets in the way. And then effects volume, ensure that that is on 100% because that's the actual important sounds that we need to hear. Finally, just come to keyboard and mouse. Couple of things in here that I think are important. Which one was it? Sorry, it's in movement. Make sure slide behavior is set to tap. This just ensures that you are actually able to slide cancel effectively in game. If you've got it set to hold, then I don't know, you've been playing a different game because it's insane trying to play with hold. Tap just means you can slide really, really efficiently, get around the map pretty quickly. And the other thing, which is something I'm going to be testing out more this patch, it's not something I've been using as much in the past, but auto tack sprint or automatic sprint. If you set this to automatic tack sprint, it can enable you to just get around the map a lot quicker. You're not having to double tap, shift whenever you're going around, same as if you're playing on a controller. A lot of the really good players in the game are using this right now. So I'm going to try it out a bit more. It might be something you want to try. You might prefer auto tack sprint to not be a thing. That's up to your personal preference. But anyway, that is all of the settings today. Hopefully not too much of a ramble. I like to, dive in and give you guys the actual full breakdown of these settings rather than just, saying use this, use this, use this, and you guys don't know why. But if you have found this video informative, as I mentioned at the start, leave a like down below, leave a comment with any questions, and subscribe for more videos coming very soon. It's been 4 Dave. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.